See, it's preparing and setting up. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast, The Stress Test, Why Organizations Struggle to Manage Employee Mental Health Today. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, please click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast has ended. If you're watching this webcast via live stream on any of our social channels, you will need to view the archive recording on HR.com to receive credit. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Mark Vickers for his presentation.
Thank you, Hester. Welcome, everybody. This is The Stress Test, Why Organizations Struggle to Manage Employee Health Today. I'm Mark Vickers. I'm the Chief Research Analyst and Data Wrangler at HR.com, which powers the HR Research Institute. And with that introduction, I just want to say thank you so much to our sponsors. We really can't do this great research we do without great sponsors. Also, if you actually took the survey or are taking other surveys of ours, thank you so much. We also can't do the research without HR professionals being willing to, take 5 minutes out of their day and fill out one of our surveys. So thank you so much for that. All right, about this particular survey. This is called the State of Mental Health and Stress in the Workplace 2024. It ran from February to March 2024, and we gathered responses from 426 HR professionals across a lot of different industries, primarily North America, primarily the United States. In terms of the size of organizations, about 3/4 of the respondents for mid-size and large organizations, which means from 100 to 1,000 plus. We do also have some smaller organizations in there as well. So it's a nice assortment of different types of companies in terms of industry and size. All right, let's first talk about mental health and stress-related issues in today's workplace. One of the first questions we ask is, does your organization offer mental health benefits, for example, as part of the health insurance strategy? And sure enough, most organizations do. 89% say yes. There are about 3% say yes, they're part of a government plan, which probably doesn't mean that they're US. So we do have some international survey takers as well. Only 8% say no. So most organizations these days offer some type of mental health benefits, and it may well be part of their health insurance plan. There may be some other possibilities there as well. Now, next we ask, as an HR professional, what do you think of the 5 mental wellness concerns most common among employees in your organization? Top answer here, probably not to your surprise, is stress. Stress is pretty common. We've found that that's the top answer for several years running, along with anxiety. Those two things often go together. Burnout, stress, anxiety, and burnout also often go together. If an employee is often stressed and anxious, then over time they're more likely to burn out in their jobs. And depression also goes with those at 69%. So these are the by far most common ailments that HR professionals are seeing in the organization. Now, we did ask folks to choose up to 5 here. So when we look at these lower answers here, like in post-traumatic stress or obsessive compulsive disorders, that doesn't mean that organizations are not seeing those. It's just not among the top 5 thing. Now, I also want to mention sleep disorders, insomnia. When you're stressed and have some anxiety, you're more likely to suffer insomnia. So that's another thing that tends to be related to these top things. So the top 5 are pretty much related together. Isolation and loneliness, that is an ongoing issue. That's tied for 5th place in this data. And that has become pretty pandemic in our organizations and in our society these days. Probably remote work has probably done a lot of good for a lot of people in terms of, allowing more work-life balance, but it probably also increases some of the loneliness and isolation that people are feeling. So since the pandemic, we may be seeing more of that than we used to. On the other hand, there's some really good benefits to working remotely as well. So what we're going to talk about stress here, for the purpose of this survey, stress refers to the negative emotional stress. Now, as you probably know, their emotional stress can be positive or negative. Positive stress tends to be short-term, and it's perceived as being within our coping ability. So negative stress is like, I can't get out of it. It's long-term, and there's very little way to cope with it. You can try to cope with it. I think you can make steps towards that, but over time, it gets really hard to cope with it because it's sort of ongoing, and you don't always feel like you can control what's happening. So when we say stress, I think we're usually referring to the negative, but I did want to highlight here that there is positive stress, and it's more the type of stress that we want in the workplace to the degree that we're looking for stress at all. We ask about the top 3 causes of employee stress stemming from outside the organization. So obviously, these days with remote work and all these other things, sort of the lines are blurring between outside and inside of the organization. But when we asked this question, we asked folks to select up to 3, and the top 3 were financial concerns, childcare issues, and healthcare concerns. Obviously, one of the real problems that people had during the pandemic was taking care of childcare concerns, because a lot of the kids couldn't actually go to the childcare center. Those are closed for some time. And so people had to balance their work life and their childcare issues. And this is ongoing. And it's not just a problem because you don't have to deal with childcare, but it's also the cost issue. It can be very costly to have childcare these days, as you probably know. And that kind of leads to financial concerns. It's certainly not the only financial concern. Inflation played a huge role here. Inflation levels have come down, but a lot of people are still feeling it, and it is slightly above what it used to be, at about 2%. Now it's more like 3%. So inflation still plays a role here. The good news is over the last year, the earnings and compensation levels have been rising above the inflation rate. So hopefully people are starting to gain back some of that territory that they may have lost during the highest inflation levels. But you can see there's also other things going on here. There's relationship troubles, there's dealing with chronic illness and elder care issues, which is like child care issues. It just sort of divides our sense of concentration, and can be very difficult for people to deal with, especially if they're working from home. But even if they're not, in fact, working in the office and trying to deal with a sick child or an elder care issue can be very, very stressful. So these are the things that can affect internal opportunities within the organization, but are usually coming from external. So what are the key takeaways based on the data we've seen so far? Well, first of all, determine the most common mental wellness issues among employees in your organization. And it's important to look both externally and internally, because even though some things are external, you may well be able to deal with them. In terms of financial wellness, for example, there's lots of different ways of helping employees coping with those, and we're going to get into those a little bit later. You may want to consider the ratio of positive stress to negative stress. One of the reasons I brought up the positive stress is that there's always going to probably be some stress. Like in my line of work, there's going to be deadlines. There are going to be short-term deadlines that you absolutely have to meet. But if you are able to get those deadlines met on a timely basis, rather than having them ongoing 24/7, then you can live with that stress, and it even feels good. Like I just did some hard work, but I pounded out, and we got this deadline met, and we're feeling pretty good about that. Now we can take a breath and move on to the next thing. But if it's always deadlines, you never feel like you can take a breath, that's not good, and that's really negative stress. So think about the ratio of that within your organization and for different jobs as well. Also investigate what's driving these issues and the degree to which your organization can reduce the severity. So depending upon what's at the highest level, is it stress? Is it anxiety? Are there financial concerns? Is that a huge problem? You can sort of gauge what they are and the degree to which they're affecting your organization. and then try to brainstorm ways of dealing with that. We're going to talk about some of those ways today. Obviously, it's just a 1 hour webcast. We can't get to everything, so you can probably come up with some great ideas yourself. Ask about how many of these issues are caused by poor talent management capabilities within your organization. As HR professionals, you have a lot of potential impact on talent management capabilities. Hopefully, you have some control over learning and development within your organization. If there's a need for certain managers or leaders or even employees to deal with stress better, then you can maybe affect that. Hopefully, you can. So think about the talent management capabilities here and how that can affect things. Also ask how you can adjust that ratio of positive to negative. Again, the positive stress is short term and within coping capabilities. So to the degree that we can make sure jobs actually, this really stressful parts are relatively short term and within coping, usually that can really help people. All right. Next, let's look at organizations' role in addressing employees' mental health issues. We asked, aside from offering mental health benefits, your organization is good at helping employees address mental health issues. Well, about 54% say that they either agree or strongly agree with this. Now, only 17% strongly agree, so maybe there's some hedging of bets there. But even when we're looking at the strongly agree and agree, it's still only 54%. Sometimes we ask the similar question within different contexts, even within the survey, and sometimes the percentages are lower depending upon how we're looking at this. So 54% is probably the best answer we're seeing here, which indicates obviously a lot of organizations do not feel their organizations are good at helping employees address stress issues. And 19% actively disagree here, which is like, when you're bothering to answer the strongly disagree or disagree, you're really feeling like, yeah, this is not something we're good at. We're really, really bad at it. And the neither agrees nor disagrees are more like, well, we're good at it over here. We're not so good here. We're good at this time of the year. We're not so great other times of the year. So there's a little more hedging there. Now, based on that data, based on that question we were just looking at, we broke the respondents out into two groups. One is called the mental health high performers, and we're going to see some data on that. These are the organizations that represent respondents who strongly agree that the organization is good at helping employees address mental health issues. And then the mental health lower performers, they're the folks who say strongly disagree or disagree that their organizations are good at helping employees address mental health issues. So we have these two sort of size of the areas of the axes. And of course, just kind of caveat here, correlation is not the same as causation. So we're looking at these things. We can't always assume that the higher performing organizations, because of what they're doing, that's exactly why they're always higher performing. There's lots of variables here. So we can't always say that one thing leads to a best practice. But we can think about it. We can sort of tease out some of the possibilities there. And this sort of gives us some possible insights, but we can't say, only this strategy really gives you high performing in this area. Okay, we also asked folks about the extent to which they agree with these following statements. And I often feel personally stressed out at work. So this is HR professionals and folks like yourself. Almost 2/3 feel like they're often stressed out at work. So HR isn't always the least stressed position you can get within your organization, and a lot of people really do feel stressed out. Only 19% actually disagree. Oh, actually, 20% actually disagree with that. So there is a lot of stress within the HR profession, and that's something we have to deal with, not just for employees, but for ourselves as HR professionals. Then we ask about stress is prevalent. And when we do that, we see 78% as opposed to 62% above. So even if HR professionals don't think that they're feeling a lot of stress in their particular line of work, they do know that stress is pretty prevalent in other parts of the organization. So as we can see, that's over 3/4. So this is a real epidemic within organizations. Stress is something that we've seen for several years running now within our research. and it really hasn't gotten much better. I think organizations are slowly trying to figure out how to deal with it, but it is a problem and it's an ongoing problem. It's not something that we're able to snap our fingers and figure out. So over time, we may be able to implement good strategies and practices and kind of get there, but it's definitely not something that is done overnight. So when we look at this by the high performers and the lower performers or lesser performers, we see that the higher performers are um, less likely to feel like stress is prevalent in their organization. And the good news is when you work for those type of organizations as an HR professional, you're less likely to feel stressed out at work. So trying to deal with these issues well is a win-win for HR. They helps within that function, but it also helps the wider organization. It makes it less prevalent within the whole organization. So again, win-win for HR if you can help your organization deal with these things. So key takeaways here. So based on those, the high performers and the lower performers, we have a couple of recommendations, and we're going to have these throughout this presentation. First, consider what's causing organizational stress and act to reduce it, which is sort of, yeah, no duh, that's what we have to do. But it's hard to, once you get that sort of large thought, it's actually hard to sort of delve down and figure out exactly what you do about each aspect of this. So for example, your organization normalizes working after regular business hours. So you might want to consider a policy where employees at least have the right to disconnect after hours. Even if they're not disconnecting, they have the right to disconnect. And you sort of saying, look, everybody, when you go home, we're obviously not expecting you to read every email or respond to every chat message. Now, that's not going to be popular among every manager within the organization or leadership, but it's just one idea of how to make stress less normalized within organizations. And we're going to look at some data about normalization of stress as well. And ensure that roles, responsibilities, and expectations are clearly communicated so employees are not stressed due to a lack of certainty around what their jobs entail. And this is pretty common. And I think it's especially common among newer employees where they may feel like everything's prioritized. And so they're more likely to burn out because they don't know, how to prioritize everything that's being expected of them or they think is expected of them. So in those cases, it's incumbent on managers and possibly HR itself to kind of stress where the priorities are within the organization. And exactly what that job entails. This is not your responsibility. This is the responsibility of this person over here. And that's important for managers too. It's not that they want to create little tiny silos for each person. Obviously, people have to work as a team, but certain people probably need to have greater priority on certain tasks than others, and that can help the whole team work better and the whole organization work better for that matter. Okay. We also asked, what are the top 3 causes of employee stress? And probably not too surprisingly, it's the demands of the workload. Now we've talked already quite a bit about workload demand and the fact that very often people just they don't feel like they can get out from under work, right? They're working all day and then they go home and they're still fine working, they're still getting messages, there's still these little crises, and the demand is just really tough. Maybe they're only working during work hours, but the expectations of what they have to do are just enormous. And they may feel like they don't really have enough staffing resources. And you'll note that inadequate staffing resources at 38%. So it may be inadequate number of people there, but also may be inadequate like tools and technologies and other things. So maybe they're outdated computers, which make the job much more difficult to get. Maybe it's a number of services that they don't have access to. There's lots of possibilities here. And as a result of these things, work-life balance issues can occur, especially if people are feeling like they need to work 24/7. It's hard to get home and then you're dealing with family issues or personal issues. and work creeps in, and it just becomes overwhelming. And I think that's all too prevalent in our workplaces today. So these three things, we ask folks to select up to three, are quite prevalent. So when we look at these other areas like poor management or ambiguity about roles or lack of control over work, we see these are lower percentages, but we should highlight here that we ask folks to select only up to three. And that's partly to figure out exactly what the highest priority is, and to give people an opportunity to only select three rather than selecting everything, which gets really tiring if you're taking the surveys. So these are the top three, but it doesn't mean these other areas in this graph are not real problems. And it's going to very much depend upon the organization itself. So we also ask folks, to what extent do you agree with the following statements about your organization? And as we can see, each of these is very highly rated in terms of agrees and strongly agrees. Stress causes unwanted employee turnover. Yep, 83% agree that that's the case. So HR professionals are clearly seeing a strong correlation, maybe causation between what's happening with stress and employee turnover. Stress reduces employee engagement. Yep, almost everybody, that's like 96%, say that this is the case. We have seen some dips in employee engagement over the last several years. I think various research organizations have seen that. I think Gallup has reported on that, probably Conference Board. We do reporting on that every year as well. We've seen a slight uptick this year, so maybe hopefully things are getting better, maybe not. But clearly, folks feel like stress reduces employee engagement. So that may be part of what's going on these days. And stress reduces employee performance. Now, this is big, and this is something HR obviously strongly believes. A stressed workforce is not only likely to leave and not be engaged, but the performance is harmed on this as well. And if you can demonstrate the correlation between stress and performance, then other people in the organization, managers at all levels of the organization, are much more likely to sit up and take notice. You may have some hard-nosed managers like, people are here to work hard, so I'm not really worried about stress. But if stress is really impacting performance, then it's impacting the bottom line. It's harming everybody. It's harming the employees, the managers, the organization as a whole, and the customers as well. So they're all big, but if you can demonstrate the correlation there, then that's important. So key takeaways here. Gather organizational data to indicate whether there's a relationship between stress and these negative outcomes, such as engagement, turnover, and performance. And we're going to talk about how to determine that a little bit later. If you do find some significant positive correlations, it's going to be easier to make that case to senior management that stress reduction programs are important. And it doesn't have to be tagged as stress reduction programs. There's other things as well, like work-life balance, which may not be an actual initiative specifically dealing with stress. It deals with a lot of things. Okay, and look for ways of reducing workload demands. Are there smarter and more efficient ways of getting the work done? Where can automation or AI help? So this is something that's quite prevalent within the HR function itself. When we look at like really important issues like legal compliance issues, for example, in many organizations, you have to do this well. It's super important to the bottom line, but HR spends a large percentage of their week dealing with those type of issues. It would be nice if more of that could be automated, either through, automation. Some of the new AIs or the older AIs could help on that as well. But obviously, once you automate something, sometimes it can get beyond your control. You don't necessarily have insight into what's going on. So some people are worried about automation, and I think rightly so. It has to be well done automation. And if you're going to use AI, it has to work very, very effectively. All right, teach communication and management skills to employees, especially managers. Although this seems really obvious, poor communication and management skills are widely cited throughout whenever we're asking about managerial communication and talent management skills. A large percentage of our HR professionals responding to our surveys indicate that they don't feel that the management skills in their organization are really good. And there's concern about that. And the question is, can HR do anything to affect that? Probably they can, either through better hiring. Maybe you don't want to promote that individual within your organization that is just good at that one job. And so you promote them because they're best at this job and their team. Well, just because you're better at the job doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a good manager. So sometimes we promote the wrong people. Sometimes we hire the wrong people. So a lot of these things are affected by HR. And of course, there's the L&D part of that as well. So offer ways to allow employees to achieve better work-life balance is another one. And in many cases, we've done this through remote work and hybrid work. There's other ways of doing this, but this is an important thing to employees, and most HR professionals understand it is. I'm not sure all direct managers understand it though. All right, barriers to minimizing employee stress. We asked, which of the following hinders your organization from the ability to reduce stress levels in the organization? And we find that organization culture that normalizes stress, that's the big one. That's cited by about half of the organizations. And there's all kinds of, it really depends upon the industry you're in, as well as the corporate culture. So if you're working in a hospital, for example, very often, my father's a doctor, and I saw a lot of this growing up. Sometimes hospitals sort of normalize stress, so everybody's stressed almost all the time. And you can understand why, like people's lives are at stake, and you're dealing with people who are suffering. So sometimes that can become part of what's happening. But really, you don't want to normalize stress over time too much, or it could really take a toll on your workforce. So you may have very well compensated, super well trained people who nonetheless leave their jobs because the stress is too much. I think we've seen a lot of that with physicians and nurses, especially the nursing shortage. Some people just get in there, they're great nurses, and then they just can't take the stress, and they'd rather be doing something else rather than being stressed their whole lives. So I'm just using hospitals as an example. There's lots of other types of industries that have these same things, and some may not be life and death as hospitals are. They may just be something that this is how the organization works. It's just a lot of stress all the time, and we've normalized it. It's just the way things are around here. Then there's lack of awareness that it's a problem. So this can really happen when managers are not aware of what's happening on the shop floor, or people dealing directly with customers and things like that. It might be something that middle managers and senior managers aren't even very much aware of. The direct managers are probably more aware of it. And unless that's communicated up the chain within organizations, people may not understand it. The other part of the issue is that managers, because of the nature of the people that take management positions, are often feel like stress is just part of their lives. It's what they actually want to do. I'm not saying they want to be stressed, but they want to hit these high marks all the time. And so they tend to be stressed in their own lives, but they don't mind it as much. But then people that are working for them are like, yeah, that's not the way I'm made. I don't want to be stressed all the time. So there's some of that as well. So there's a communication and awareness problem within organizations. There's lack of commitment on the part of leadership. And these two things go together. The lack of awareness about the problem and the lack of commitment on the part of leadership. Those two things are obviously very much related. Now, it doesn't mean that leaders are always unaware. They may be quite aware that there's a lot of stress going on within the organization, but they're just not committed to stopping it because they have their own commitments to make, right? They have performance goals to hit, and they have profitability to achieve, and there's all these other things. And so they're putting some of those goals, which is why, and very often they're there before the other things. So I do want to mention that not enough financial resources comes up here as well, and that could be a big thing for employees, but it's just not among the top three here. All right. Why do you think today's younger employees compared to older colleagues tend to be more vocal in addressing mental health issues? So this is a question we ask. We have people on our advisory boards. So just a little background, we have advisory boards for all our state of the industry research, and they're great. They're absolutely fantastic people. They're expert in their areas, and they help us craft good survey questions. And they help us raise a variety of issues. So one of the things we did this year, in addition to doing the survey, we have sort of questions that sometimes you're asked after you've watched a webcast like this one. And this is one of those questions. So it wasn't in the survey as a whole, it was more asked after webcasts. And so we wanted to get a little view about younger employees because our advisory board was talking about this, saying they felt like there's a difference in terms of how different generations perceive some of these issues. And so we asked about this. And we found that why is this happening with younger employees? Well, given there's greater awareness and knowledge of mental health issues, 62%. So that's the top answer. And that probably is true. If you're an older employee, these issues probably weren't even brought up when you were starting in on the workforce. It was just sort of verboten to talk about stress, especially mental health. And now it's more open. And so this may be one reason why the younger generations are willing to be more open in talking about it and talk about addressing it. So there's different expectations for their work environment and about work-life balance. So those things are connected. 53% talk about decreased social stigma about mental health issues. And I think that's also true, especially since the pandemic hit. People are more willing to talk about depression and isolation and some of these other really important mental health issues. And we've seen some diminishment of overall mental health, at least within the United States. And part of this is connected to all kinds of different issues. So it's probably a good time to reduce the social stigma around these things so we can more properly address it. And then there's more discussion of and support for mental health on social media. I think social media has played a larger role. You'll see folks on TikTok or wherever, willing to discuss what's happening in their own mental health issues. And so it's just become less stigmatized over time, which is probably a very good thing for the most part. And there's also other things like improved mental health resources at work, but that's only 25%. Advances in mental health research, only 21%. So these aren't seen as the top reasons for this trend. So we ask, which of the following does your organization to offer for mental health and stress? So basically, what are you doing about it? The top answer here is EAPs, or employee assistance programs. These have been around a long time, and they really were talked about a lot during the pandemic days. There were some during that time we were talking to employers and HR professionals, and they were concerned that employees weren't taking enough advantage of those EAPs, and they were concerned about EAP usage and things like that. So they knew that they had some good programs, good initiatives within the EAPs, but the employees weren't always aware of them. And even if they're aware, they weren't really using them. So it can be an important thing to communicate within your organization that these are available to employees. And some organizations tried to more clearly communicate this, especially to people that were working from home, so that they could take advantage of these things. And of course, EAPs themselves had to do more remote operations rather than going into an office. So this has been a topic of discussion for several years now, but it continues to be the top one. I think what's happening is employers are trying to get better usage out of their EAPs. And there's healthcare benefits, including mental health coverage. That's obviously widely used. It's obviously a component in a lot of healthcare benefit insurance programs and benefits within organizations. 69% is a little low for that. My take on this is it probably should be part of all health insurance programs, but that's just my take. Mental health resources and information, those are cited by 50%. So these are things, and this EAP could be one of those, right? Very often, because and mental health is still somewhat stigmatized within organizations. A lot of employees won't even ask about what resources are available or information is available. And maybe that's more likely, that reticence may be more likely among older employees than some younger employees. So this is information that should be communicated out into organizations so that employees at least know they have some options here. And there's lots of other things. Flexible work options are selected fourth here, along with regular check-ins with managers. The regular check-ins with managers and things like that are something that also came about often because of the pandemic. Managers started doing more check-ins and one-on-ones with employees as part of it wasn't always performance management per se, but there was that desire to really check in with people and seeing how they were doing and faring. So I think there's more of that. I think that's generally a healthy thing, as long as managers know what they're doing there. And then there's opportunities to do charity and volunteer work, and that's selected by 37%. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that. There was a study showing that there's a pretty strong correlation between opportunities to do charity and volunteer work and mental health among employees. And I don't think we always have been thinking that way. We've been thinking more like, meditation and those type of things. I think we'll hear more about opportunities to do charity and volunteer work as a way to increase employee well-being generally. And as you can see down below, only 4% say they don't do any of these things. So these are well practiced overall. Most organizations do something here. It's the very, very rare organization that doesn't do anything for mental health or stress. This has become a higher priority over time, and it's something that organizations are thinking more about and trying to do more about. So when we looked at this by the mental health, the higher performers and the lower performers, we found that there's huge differences here. As you can see there, these are some of the areas where there's the very large percentage point differences. So in terms of offering mental health resources, information, almost all the mental health high performers are doing this at 78% versus only 15% of the lower performers here. So humongous difference in terms of percentage points. Regular check-ins with managers, also much more likely to do that among mental health high performers. Oh, it doesn't mean that the managers are grilling people about their mental health. It just means they're checking in with them to see how they're faring, to see how they're looking at their work and how they're looking at their lives and whether they have any things they want to address. So it's not necessarily managers, dialing in and trying to, talk to their employees specifically about mental health, but just the check-ins themselves. Excuse me. And then there's opportunities to do more charity work. Opportunities to do more charity work. This is also something that the higher performers are doing better. Flexible work practices, they're also more likely to do, but that's more like a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's not, this is also something that a lot of companies are doing. Hotlines or similar services are also something that the higher performers are much more likely to do. So we can see that there are some real differences here. Mental health days, I just wanted to point out that there's a large difference here, 32% to 5%. So not all the high performers are doing this by any means, only about a third are, but that's compared to 5%. So there's like a 6-to-1 ratio here. So it is something that is being done much more by some of the higher performers. So given all this, what are some of the key takeaways here? Well, prioritize offering a variety of mental health resources to help all stakeholders better understand how to cope with these issues. It's, as we just saw, it's not just one thing that these higher performers are doing. It's a lot of different things. So there may be 10 different things that they're doing more. So it's a whole systematic approach to addressing stress and mental health issues. Encourage managers to check in regularly with employees. That does seem to be something that's done more among these higher performers. but only if managers that can actually do this well. If you have some bad managers poorly trained, then that's really not going to help. So it's also going to depend upon the skill level of the managers and the degree to which they've been trained to do this better. Provide opportunities to engage in charity work. The Industrial Relations Journal is a study I was just thinking about. Over the last year or so, this study came out. It looked at outcomes of 90 different interventions in terms of well-being, but it did find that the one that was strongest was this charity or volunteer work. So it's something interesting to consider if you've not considered it, and you may want to look up that article to kind of get a feel for how they were reporting it. Now, not all employees are comfortable speaking to their managers. So we were talking about those managerial check-ins. So it's important to offer things like hotline services or other forms of confidential support for employees to seek assistance if they need to. In some cases, the manager is the issue that's driving the stress. So we can't completely depend upon managers. People need to have other options there. All right. We also ask, which of the following learning initiatives does your organization or partner organizations offer to employees to help them manage stress? Well, the top one here, interestingly, is financial wellness education. And we've seen a lot more about that in our research. In fact, we do a specific piece of research just about financial wellness. And if you look on our website, you'll find an entire report, an infographic, and there's a specific webcast devoted to that as well. So if you're interested in specifically in financial wellness education, we do have quite a bit of information on financial wellness in general and education in particular. Mindfulness or meditation resources. This is something that's been around, but I think has become more common over the years. Resources such as stress-related videos and articles. Lots of this is possible to glean from the internet. HR professionals and other people that may have expertise in this area kind of need to curate what's the best stuff out there, because obviously the internet is full of information, not all of it good. So to the degree you're a HR professional or other expert that's thinking about these things, you may need to curate what the best resources are. And then there's mentoring and coaching. And mentoring and coaching is something that's used for a lot of different reasons within organizations. And this could be one of them. This could be something that they're helping with, but probably the reason it's fourth on this list is just because it's relatively prevalent anyway. So it's not that necessarily you're doing this specifically to address stress and mental health issues. It's partly because we're just doing it anyway. But when we're looking at these other things like stress management workshops or classes and managerial training to recognize or address stress, which we've talked a little bit about already, these numbers are low. I mean, that's kind of scary that more managers don't have any kind of training in this area. And given the fact that almost everybody responding to this survey feels like stress is very prevalent in their organization, in some cases it's normalized within the organization, then not having any stress management workshops or classes seems not so great, given the extent of the problem. And 20%, or about a fifth of respondents, say they're not doing any of this stuff. So they may feel like they have a lot of stress, mental health issues within the organization, but they're not doing anything about it, which is also not great. All right, when we look at this by high performers and the lower performers in this area, we can see that these are the areas where you have the largest percentage point differences. Work-life balance, education strategies. This is something that we've talked a lot over the years. This is a real problem. Mindfulness, meditation resources. Only 23% of the lower performers are doing any of that. Coaching, mentoring, a big difference. Financial wellness education, a very large difference, almost a 3-to-1 difference there. So the folks that feel like they're better are doing it considerably better. You can also see that 44% of the low performers don't do anything. They are the none of the above group, whereas only 2% of the high performers say the same. And I'd love to talk to those 2% and see how they do it without any kind of programs, but that's another topic. Key takeaways. Encourage the use of mindfulness and meditation resources to aid in stress reduction. As the data suggests, there's a positive correlation here. At least our data suggests that. It doesn't mean it's the end all be all. It's not going to cure everything. Develop mentoring and coaching programs to provide personalized support and guidance. It's not the only reason for a coaching program. It may not be the main reason for a coaching or mentoring program, but it can have some supportive effect there. Include financial wellness in the portfolio of learning initiatives. Really, when we're asking about financial well-being and stress within the organization, we find that education is the most common approach to this. So training and education, sometimes you're going to use an outside service to help people deal with the financial strategies and things like that. So it's not all done, not necessarily done internally either. Sometimes you're working with a vendor or partner of some sort. Invest in managerial training focused on recognizing and addressing signs of stress among team members. And provide various resources. Those could be videos and articles, the type of thing we were just talking about. These can be really important to dealing with some of these issues. All right, organizational culture and stress. To what extent do you agree with the following statements? The organization has a culture of caring, which is great. You know, that's 63% that feel like their organization has a culture of caring. I think that's excellent. My feeling on this, if we had looked at this 10 years ago or 20 years ago, those numbers would not be so high. So I think that's great and probably a testament to a lot of HR's efforts over the years. In our corporate culture, it's okay to discuss stress levels. Well, that's lower. That's only 58% or so. So definitely not everybody. Employees valued typically match up with organizational values and practices. That's 57%. That's actually higher than I might have expected. So it's great because a lot of, especially the younger employees, are really thinking about whether their values match up with their overall organizational values. And it's nice to see that these things are being linked together in over half of organizations. Now, what's not so great is that there's quite a few organizations that say only a few organizations that say their organization has an environment conducive to mental health. So we can see that that's like 31%. That's quite a low number. So you may have a culture of caring, but that doesn't mean your environment is conducive to mental health. You may have a culture of caring. Maybe you're in a hospital, which we were talking about before, and you have a culture of caring, but you also have normalized stress. So, these two things may vie against each other. Then we see other things like stress resources are well communicated. Managers know how to guide employees who are suffering from stress, or they're well trained to recognize stress levels. These are very, very low numbers. So in terms of managerial capabilities or training on this, very few organizations are doing a good job. When we look at this by the higher and lower performers, we do see that the higher performers are much more likely to say their organization has an environment conducive to mental health. So that's 67% to 5%, huge differential there. And I've sort of highlighted the other areas where there's very large differentials, like stress reduction resources are well communicated. The managerial expectations here are humongously different. You can see in the higher performers are way more likely to say their managers are trained to recognize and help guide employees. Now, this does not mean that you want your managers all acting like psychologists or mental health professionals. That's not the message here. But be able to help them, guide them when they seem to be struggling and where they're asking for help struggling. That's a different story. You can guide them to the EAPs and things like that. So generally speaking, encourage a match between employee values and organizational practices in your organization. It's good. It's going to engage more people and kind of align people within the organization. Nurture that workplace culture that normalizes conversations about stress and mental health. Now, I think that we need to be careful about how we phrase that. We need to be somewhat open about these things, but people should not be expected to just open up about mental health issues all the time. No pressure on employees to do any of that kind of thing. So there's clearly some training involved here. You can implement initiatives like check-ins and anonymous surveys to look at things like stress levels. Provide managers with the training how to recognize these things. Maybe this is empathic leadership and effective communication. But again, don't expect them to be counselors unto themselves. Create a centralized, easily accessible repository of mental health resources. That can be also super important. All right, common mental health measures and methods. All right, we have some lousy news here. For the most part, organizations are not measuring either the stress levels of the workforce or the mental health of the workforce. Only about 1 in 5 are doing these things. Now, on one respect, you can understand this. Employee privacy is huge. You do not want to infringe on employee privacy. So it's important if you're going to gather data in this area, you have to do it carefully and in very ethical manners. But still, these are really, really low numbers. The other part about this is that when we've asked people about the extent of stress and mental health issues within their organization, it's clear from this data that a lot of that is anecdotal. People don't necessarily measure it, and so they're sort of guessing based on gut reactions to some of these other areas that we've been looking at so far. So we have to take some of that data with a grain of salt, because not all that many folks are measuring this in any kind of way. When we look at this by the different types of performers, we do see that stress levels for the workforce, we see 59% of the higher performers are figuring out a way to measure that, where only 12% of the others, 57% to 9% in terms of the mental health. So high performers, despite the difficulty of achieving such measures, most of them are doing that, and very few of the lower performers. So often, as in many cases, measurement sort of matters in how you manage people. We ask, how does your organization measure mental health and or stress levels within the organization? And keep in mind, there's skip logic within the survey, so we're only asking that minority of folks that actually do this kind of measurement. And we see that the top answer here is surveys. HR tends to depend on surveys a lot within organizations, and they're a very good tool. I think that we've gotten better at using surveys, and the survey technologies themselves have gotten better. Some of them are also using things like employee engagement rates. And sometimes that's not overall engagement. Sometimes that's engagement with certain things like programs. One-on-one conversations, there's been more of those. 54% cite those. Absenteeism rates cited by about half of organizations. It's relatively easy to track absenteeism rates as well as turnover rates, which is at 49%. But it's hard to figure out, how much of those are stress-driven or mental health-driven. But you might be able to discern some patterns if you're looking at these things with an analytical eye. Data provided by EAPs. We saw before that most companies are using EAPs, but only 45% of the companies that actually have metrics are getting data from the EAPs. And obviously, you want to keep EAP data private. Again, you do not want to infringe on employee privacy there, but you can provide, EAPs can often provide overall numbers to kind of get a picture of what might be happening within the organization in general. And so sometimes that data can be gleaned. And there's other things here. There's changes in health risk factors. There's sentiment analysis taking advantage of the natural language possibilities within certain AI frameworks. Would you like to see, or what would you like to see from providers that offer products and services in the area of mental health and stress management? Well, better employee engagement. So in this case, I think we're talking about engagement with the programs. So again, if you're having EAPs, you want to make sure that some employees are actually using them, especially when they need to use them. So higher employee usage rates. It's the estimation of HR that stress is very widely prevalent. So they can be frustrated by seeing that employees aren't actually using some of the programs. So they want to see higher usage rates of those programs, better communication of those programs, which can help have higher usage rates. Also things like greater flexibility, and that we're talking about the products and services themselves, not within the organization as a whole. So the products and services need to be flexible to deal with a range of different issues and workforce arrangements. more diverse therapists that match the population. So sometimes there's not enough diversity within the therapist community for the diversity of employees we have today. And there's other things like better services and greater customization of those services. So key takeaways here are find ways of measuring stress levels within your organization, be it surveys, one-on-ones, et cetera. You'll have to evaluate that yourself and try to figure out what makes more sense. But most organizations are not doing this at all. Train managers on how to help employees manage stress as well as manage their own. This does need to be done carefully. Managers should not be expected to be trained mental health counselors, but they should be made aware of how their own behaviors and expectations can contribute to or alleviate negative stress, and how to guide employees to the good resources and how to understand how to access the resources and basically communicate well. They also have to be better at self-care. Managers are often the victims of stress themselves. So we should be thinking about how we can help managers take care of themselves. And by the way, this also applies to HR professionals. Obviously, we've seen that HR professionals are often stressed out themselves, and they need to take care of themselves so that they can take care of other people within the organization. So this is something that may be on your agenda if you're feeling stressed yourself. All right, when seeking new services or technologies related to these issues, consider how to improve the usage rates, better improve communication, and gauge the overall effectiveness of various strategies. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I just want to say there's lots of other things that are going on. Artificial intelligence is one of the big issues these days. They are finding that some of the types of chatbots that are used for personal use sometimes have a good effect on people's mental health. Like there's less suicidal ideation according to some of the studies and things like that. Doesn't mean you have AIs who are mental health counselors, but it's interesting to look at some of the possible benefits of having some of these relationships. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying that that's one of the conversations out there. We're definitely not there in terms of creating AI mental health counselors. But to the degree AI is being used, it can be used to reduce workload and therefore reduce stress within organizations to the degree you can automate work. It can also provide some continuous monitoring, like through the sentiment analysis, so you can kind of see where stress may be cropping up within your organization. So you're not targeting individuals, you're more like discerning patterns within the organization as a whole. AI can also provide more personalized support. It might be able to, but in a negative way, it might also lead to more uncertainty. People might be afraid about their jobs, for example, if they're going to take away their jobs. They might also be afraid that it's biased in some way. So AI is something that is playing in this range. We're not sure exactly how it's all going to work out. There's some negative as well as positive possibilities here, but I did want to mention it because we didn't have much in the survey about that. And so with that, I'm going to close this up and turn it back over to you, Hester. I do want to say, if you'd like to look at our research report, it should be online as of today. And if you'd like to take a survey, please do that. And if you'd like to contact me with any questions or responses, please do that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Hester.
I'd like to thank Mark as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the HR.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your HR.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.